I just wanted silence, a few nights alone in a cabin high on Wendigo Mountain. But the silence here isn't empty, it breathes. At night, something outside calls my name, in a voice that sounds exactly like mine. And now, I'm starting to remember why I've been here before. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the bed. It happened 2 winters ago, somewhere deep in northern Montana, near the border where the locals say the wind never stops whispering. My name is Austin. I was 35 when it happened, and I still can't drive through the mountains without feeling that same cold crawling under my skin. After my divorce, I needed silence, real silence, so I rented a small wooden cabin on a place called Wendigo Mountain. It sounded remote enough to forget everything for a while. The road up the mountain was almost empty. Snow covered the signs, and my GPS stopped working about 30 minutes before I reached the base. The last stop was an old gas station. The man inside looked like he hadn't spoken to anyone for days. When I told him where I was headed, he stared at me for a long moment and said, "Stay off the ridge after dark. The wind there isn't just wind." I laughed, but his eyes didn't move. By the time I reached the cabin, daylight had already gone. The building looked like it had been standing there for decades, small porch, crooked chimney, and a single lantern swinging in the wind. I remember thinking it felt almost staged, like something from an old movie. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of pine and damp wood. The place had everything I needed, a stove, a bed, and a journal left on the table with the words "Property of D. Harris" written on the cover. I assumed it belonged to a past guest. I filmed a short clip on my phone, saying something about finally finding peace. Then I made some coffee, lit the fireplace, and sat near the window. Snow began to fall harder, muffling every sound outside. For the first time in months, I felt calm. But that calm didn't last long. Around midnight, I woke up without knowing why. The fire had gone out, and the only sound was the soft hum of the wind outside. Then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow. Not an animal. Too heavy. Too slow. The steps circled the cabin once, then stopped right under my window. I held my breath and waited. After a few seconds, something brushed lightly against the glass, like fingers. I wanted to tell myself it was a branch, but there were no trees close enough to touch the window. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the black window pane. Then came another sound, a low dragging, like someone pulling their feet through the snow. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it outside. The beam of light caught nothing but fog. And then, in the distance, I saw what looked like a shape, tall, too tall, standing motionless between the trees. The light flickered, and the shape vanished. My chest tightened. I turned off the flashlight and backed away from the window. For the next few hours, I sat by the wall, listening. Every few minutes, I heard a faint crunch, like someone pacing slowly outside. It continued until dawn. When the morning light finally crept through the curtains, I forced myself to open the door. The air was freezing, my breath turning white in front of me. Around the cabin, I saw the tracks, deep, uneven prints that led in a perfect circle. At first, they looked human, but when I knelt to examine them, I saw how wrong they were. The footprints were elongated, with marks that looked like claws dragging behind the toes. I followed them a few feet before they disappeared into the tree-line. No broken branches, no sign of struggle. Just silence. I turned back to the cabin and noticed something else. Near the window, pressed faintly into the glass, was the outline of a hand. 5 long fingers, far too long to be human. I packed my things that morning, but I didn't leave. The snowstorm had grown worse, and the road was blocked. I told myself I'd leave the next day. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it had to be an animal or a trick of the light. Still, when night came again, I couldn't bring myself to look out the window. Before I went to sleep, I opened the old journal I'd found on the table. Most of the pages were blank, except for one sentence written near the back in shaky handwriting. "It comes when you're alone." The wind outside rose suddenly, whistling through the cracks in the walls. I closed the book, turned off the lantern, and waited for sleep, but deep down, I knew something was out there, waiting too. When morning came, the light didn't bring comfort. It only made everything feel more exposed. The snow outside was so white it hurt my eyes, but all I could focus on were the footprints. They formed a perfect circle around the cabin, each print deep, sharp, and larger than my own by several inches. They weren't just beside the walls, they were right up against them, like someone had been pressing close, watching through the windows all night. I took a few photos with my phone, though I don't really know why. Maybe I wanted proof in case I started doubting what I'd seen. I followed the tracks for about 50 feet until they vanished into the forest, as if whatever made them had lifted straight off the ground. There were no drag marks, no break in the snow, just a clean disappearance. I returned to the cabin and made coffee with shaking hands. The silence was heavier than before. No birds, no branches snapping, only wind. Around noon, I decided to explore a bit farther. The air smelled metallic, like frozen iron. About half a mile from the cabin, I found something buried beneath the snow, a rusted tin box and the torn remains of a camping bag. Inside the box were a lighter, a knife, and a waterlogged journal with pages stuck together. I brought it back inside to dry near the stove. Once the pages softened, I started reading. The handwriting was messy, hurried. The first few entries were about hunting, elk, foxes, sometimes bears. But then, near the back, the tone changed. Something's wrong here. It knows when I'm awake. The next page was half burned. Another line, written shakily. It copies voices. It wants to be invited in. I stopped reading. The wind outside seemed to rise the moment I closed the book. I told myself it was coincidence, but a part of me didn't believe it. As the day went on, the weather worsened. Snow thickened, and my phone lost all signal. When I checked the photos I had taken of the footprints, they were there, but in one of them, behind the prints, a faint shadow stretched across the snow. I hadn't noticed it before. It looked like a figure, tall and crooked, standing just at the edge of the trees. Night came faster than I expected. I made a fire and tried to drown the sounds with the crackle of burning wood. I didn't want to think about the shadow, or the voice from the journal, or the warning from the gas station man. Still, the thought kept returning, it copies voices. Around midnight, I heard something outside again. At first it was the same crunching snow, steady and patient. Then, silence. After a moment, I heard it. A voice. Soft. Familiar. "Austin, please, come out." It was her voice, my ex-wife's. The exact tone, the same warmth, the same rhythm when she said my name. "Austin, please, I need to talk to you." My heart nearly stopped. She lived hundreds of miles away. I didn't move. I only whispered to myself that it wasn't real. The voice grew closer, trembling like she was crying. "Please, I'm cold. Open the door." I stood, holding my breath. For a second, I almost did it. Then I remembered the words from the journal, "It wants to be invited in." I turned off the lantern. The cabin fell into darkness. I could hear slow footsteps just beyond the door, followed by another whisper, deeper this time, the same voice, but broken, distorted, as if something else was trying to form words through her throat. When it stopped, I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. The silence was worse than the sound. Only the wind remained, brushing faintly against the walls like fingers searching for a way in. At dawn, I finally dared to open the door. No sign of anyone. But near the porch, there were two sets of prints now, one human-sized, and one beside it, stretched and wrong. Both led into the trees, side by side, before fading into the snow. I closed the door, locked it, and sat with the journal in my hands. The fire had burned out, but I couldn't move to relight it. I just kept staring at the last sentence I'd read, written in trembling ink. "It copies voices. It wants to be invited in." That night, I decided to stay awake. By the third day, time had started to blur. I couldn't tell if it was morning or afternoon without looking outside. My phone's clock froze at 2:17 a.m. and never changed again. The battery hadn't died, the numbers just stopped. Even my wristwatch ticked but stayed on the same minute. I remember staring at it for a long time, trying to understand how that could be possible. I hadn't slept since the night I heard her voice. Every sound made my heart jump. When the wind pushed against the windows, I imagined someone breathing on the glass. When the cabin creaked, I imagined footsteps upstairs, even though there was no upstairs. I told myself to calm down, to think rationally. But reason doesn't survive long when the forest itself starts to feel alive. That morning, I decided to leave. I packed a few things, stuffed a journal in my bag, and stepped outside. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky was a dull gray, heavy and close. I followed the narrow trail that led downhill, the same one I'd driven up 2 days before. It should have taken me back toward the main road in an hour. After 15 minutes of walking, I noticed something strange. The trail curved in the wrong direction. I checked my compass, but the needle spun in slow circles, never settling. I walked faster, trying to keep track of landmarks, a split tree, a pile of rocks, a bend near a frozen stream. But when I turned around, they were gone. Every direction looked the same. The woods were too quiet. I couldn't even hear my own footsteps right. The sound came a fraction too late, like an echo following me instead of leading. The deeper I went, the more distorted the silence became, a pressure in my ears, a faint vibration, like something huge breathing beneath the snow. After an hour, I saw smoke in the distance. Hope hit me hard. Maybe another cabin. Maybe people. I pushed through the trees and found the remains of a camp, a ring of blackened stones, burned wood, and what looked like old bones scattered around it. Near the ashes lay another backpack, torn open. I knelt down and saw a name tag stitched inside, D. Harris, the same name written in the first journal I'd found. My hands shook as I pulled the zipper pocket open. Inside was a small tape recorder. The buttons were rusted, but it still clicked on. Static filled the air, and then a man's voice came through, quiet, exhausted. It's been 3 nights. It keeps calling. Sometimes it sounds like my brother. Sometimes it sounds like me. It knows my name. It knows what I fear. If anyone finds this, don't answer it. The tape cut off with a scraping noise. I dropped it. The sound of my own name echoed behind me, whispered, soft, almost kind. Austin. I froze. It wasn't the same voice as before. This one sounded like me. Exactly like me. I turned around. No one was there. The air felt thick, almost liquid. I could feel eyes on me from somewhere in the trees. My breath came out in white bursts as I ran. Branches whipped my face, and snow crunched violently under my boots. The whisper followed, bouncing from every direction. Austin, come back. By the time I found the cabin again, it was nearly dark. I slammed the door shut and pushed a chair against it. My heart wouldn't slow down. I lit every candle I had left and checked the windows. Outside, the snow had started again, but the footprints were already there, fresh, circling, as if someone had been waiting for me to return. I pulled the tape recorder from my pocket and played the last few seconds again, just to be sure I'd heard right. But when I pressed play, it wasn't the man's voice this time. It was mine, breathing heavily, whispering the same words over and over. If anyone finds this, don't answer it. The lantern flickered. I thought I heard movement above me, a slow dragging across the roof, like claws scraping the wood. I grabbed the fire poker from the stove and stood in the center of the room, trying to listen. The dragging stopped. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, the recorder still in my hand, my own voice repeating through the static. The knocks grew louder, 4, then 5. Shaking the walls. Then silence again. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I sat down by the dying fire and stared at the door. On the inside of the window, a faint pattern had formed, 5 long lines pressed into the frost, like fingers. I wiped it away, but the mark stayed, etched into the glass. Somewhere outside, the wind began to moan. This time, it wasn't just wind. I woke up on the floor, though I didn't remember falling asleep. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax, and the fire was out. The cabin smelled of smoke and cold ash. For a moment, I thought the night had ended, but when I looked through the window, it was still dark. The horizon glowed faintly gray, like dawn that refused to come. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale felt heavy. My throat was dry, my ears ringing with that same faint vibration I'd heard in the woods, like something large moving beneath the ground. I poured a cup of melted snow from the kettle and drank, though the water tasted wrong, metallic, as if it had absorbed the air's decay. I needed to move. Sitting still only made the silence louder. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a wall. The wind wasn't steady anymore, it came in short, sharp bursts, almost rhythmic, like breathing. The footprints from the night before had filled with fresh snow, but a new trail led into the trees, straight from my porch. They were shallow, as if whoever made them was gliding rather than walking. I followed them, against every instinct I had. My mind screamed to go back, but my body moved anyway. The woods seemed denser now, the trees leaning inward as if listening. The snow underfoot was mixed with something darker, small patches of burnt wood and bone fragments half buried in ice. After about 10 minutes, I came across what looked like an old hunting ground. Rusted traps, broken arrows, a blackened fire pit. And there, lying beside the ashes, was what remained of a deer, or what used to be one. The body was half burned, the ribs exposed like a cage. But the strangest part was the hands. Human hands. Pale, frozen, emerging from the snow, pressed flat near the carcass as if someone had been crawling toward it before the fire took them. Next to the remains was a small leather pouch. Inside were teeth, not animal, not human either, too long, too narrow, the edges worn down like stone. I dropped them instantly. My breath came faster, leaving fog trails that hung in the still air. Then I heard it, faint at first, coming from behind me. My name. Austin. It wasn't shouted. It was breathed. Familiar, but empty. I turned, and through the fog, I saw something move between the trees, tall, almost skeletal, bending in unnatural angles. Its eyes glowed faintly yellow, like the reflection of light on glass. For a few seconds, it just watched. Then it spoke again, but this time, it wasn't just my name. It used my voice. You shouldn't have come back. The sound made my stomach twist. I ran. The forest spun around me, the path changing beneath my feet. Every shadow stretched too far. Every tree looked like it was leaning closer. When I finally saw the cabin again, it was almost morning, or something close to it. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands were bleeding, though I didn't remember cutting them. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to control my breathing. The sound of the wind outside grew stronger, but there was something underneath it, a low hum, deep and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards. I grabbed the old journal again. The last page I hadn't read was torn, but one line was still visible. They say it begins as hunger, and ends as memory. The wind howled, and for the first time, I heard words in it, faint, layered voices, dozens of them whispering over each other. I thought I could make out my own among them. I went to the window. The snowstorm had nearly cleared, but across the clearing, I saw movement, a figure standing exactly where I'd seen the shape on the first night. It was thin, impossibly tall, with long arms hanging almost to its knees. The head tilted slightly, studying me. Then, for just a second, it stepped closer, and I saw the face, part human, part something else. Skin stretched too tight over bone, and beneath the hollow eyes, a mouth that opened far wider than it should have. Inside, I saw something I'll never forget, not teeth, but faces. Tiny, moving faces, whispering through the gaps. I stumbled backward. The lantern fell, shattering. The fire flared, then died, plunging the cabin into darkness. Outside, something dragged slowly across the porch, claws scraping wood. I heard the doorknob turn once, then again. I didn't wait to see what came next. I bolted the back door, ran into the small storage room, and pulled it shut. The last thing I remember before passing out was hearing my own voice whisper from the other side of the door, calm and close. "It's cold out here. Let me in." The light woke me before the sound did. At first, I thought it was sunrise, pale, cold light seeping through the cracks in the cabin wall. But when I opened my eyes, I realized it wasn't the sun. The glow was gray, like light reflected off snow and fog. It felt dead, not warm. My throat ached from breathing the frozen air all night. I was still in the storage room, curled against the wall. The door stood half open, the hinges bent outward. I didn't remember opening it. The silence was deeper than before. No wind, no creaking wood. The air felt heavy, almost thick enough to swallow sound. I stepped out carefully. Every muscle in my body hurt. The main room was a wreck, broken glass from the lantern, footprints scattered across the floor, my things thrown everywhere. But something was wrong. There were two sets of footprints, mine, and another pair, identical in shape and size, walking beside mine, and then back out through the front door. I opened the door slowly. The world outside looked drained of color. Snow covered everything, untouched except for a single trail of prints leading away from the cabin. I followed them until they stopped at the edge of the trees. That's where I saw it. A figure stood there, half hidden in the mist. Same height as me, same clothes, even the same torn sleeve on the jacket. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted slightly, watching. I called out, "Who are you?" But the sound came back wrong, delayed, softer, like an echo whispered by someone else. Then it spoke. My voice. "I told you not to come back." I stumbled backward. The air turned colder, my breath freezing midair. The figure stepped forward into clearer view. Its face looked like mine, but stretched, pale, skin pulled tight over bone, eyes too wide. When it smiled, the skin cracked at the corners of its mouth. For a second, I couldn't move. I just stared as it raised its hand, the same hand as mine, and pointed toward the cabin. I turned. Through the open door, I saw movement inside. Something stood where I had been moments ago, near the fire. Another me, crouched beside the ashes, whispering softly into the recorder. I heard my own voice from inside the cabin. "If anyone finds this, don't go up Wendigo Mountain. It's not a legend. It's hunger." The words echoed through the still air, matching the voice I'd heard on the recordings from before. My head spun. I didn't know which one of us was real anymore. I shouted, but the figure near the fire didn't look up, it just kept speaking into the recorder, repeating the same sentence again and again. The one outside, the thing that looked like me, tilted its head, then stepped closer. Its eyes had gone black. When it spoke again, the words were slower, heavier. "You remember now, don't you?" And I did. Flashes came back like pieces of broken film, the same cabin years earlier, a hunting trip, the same snow, the same sound of the wind whispering my name. I'd been here before. I wasn't the first Austin to rent this place. My knees gave out. I fell into the snow. The figure crouched beside me, its face inches from mine. It smelled of earth and rot. It smiled again, and I saw my reflection in its eyes, but my reflection didn't move when I did. Then everything went silent. No pain, no breath, no cold, only stillness. When the search team found the cabin 2 weeks later, they said it looked abandoned for months. Inside, they discovered a burned-out fireplace, a collapsed chair, and a single phone on the floor. The last recording on it was 6 minutes long. The voice on the tape, calm, slow, familiar, said, "My name is Austin Reed. If you're hearing this, don't go up Wendigo Mountain. It's not empty. It never was." The recording ended with a faint noise, a breath that wasn't quite human, followed by the sound of footsteps crunching in snow, moving away until the tape cut out. No trace of Austin Reed was ever found. But one of the rescuers swore he saw someone standing among the trees as they were leaving, a man in a torn gray jacket, watching silently as they drove down the mountain.